It's funny. We had a nice little relationship. Hey, think he called me on Christmas. I heard. Huh. Initially, it was reciprocal. Respect. Two legends connect generations to create classic music. Paul McCartney liked Jackson's talent. Michael viewed Paul as a mentor. At some point, that mentorship changed. Paul gave one suggestion for Michael permanentized their bond. What his next action blindsided him. Daring. So unexpected it left McCartney feels betrayed. Once phoned friend. Years later, Heck Insider at one of the best, he learned terrible career lessons. The childhood shaped a bug. On June 18, 1942, in Liverpool, England, a legend was made. James Paul McCartney, James and Mary's son McCartney. Remembering those early days years, Paul often remembers his parents and his close-knit community grown up. They were common, hard-working folks who founded post-war Britain's backbone. They provided his basis that later influenced him. Music was always McCartney family thanks to his father Jim, who played both trumpet, piano. Not long, Paul showed inherent talent. For it. He learned piano by ear. Joined the church choir before long. Music was embroidered. His life. Paul turned 14. His father handed him a gorgeous nickel-plated trumpet. Thoughtful gift, but rock and roll crashed quickly. The trumpet sounded in his universe. Not feeling right. He wanted one. Guitar. He could sing and play simultaneously. He traded that. Acoustic renowned Zenith trumpet guitar, worth £15. There was one. Minor issue. Paul was left-handed. Trying right-handed guitar felt absolutely backward. Until then, he saw a Slim Whitman poster strumming left-handed guitarist reverse strings. That simple. Discovery altered everything. Paul flipped his guitar strings suddenly, everything became sense. At that moment, he wrote his first song on guitar, that gentle song, I Lost My Little Girl. He began around the same period, working on the piano again, and arriving with an early When I'm 64 song unreleased until Beatles' Sgt. Pepper later. Of course, no musician survives in isolation. Paul needed bandmates. They shared his sound passion. That opportunity came in 1954 when 12-year-old Paul met another neighborhood lad, George Harrison, on the bus. They connected over music and immediately got friends without realizing they influenced music history. A few later, at 15, Paul attended a Walton St. Peter's Church Destiny. He saw the skiffle group Quarrymen performing. Their lead singer, charming teen guitarist John Lennon, was arrested instantly. His focus. Band energy was raw. Unlike anything Paul has heard. Later, the Quarrymen invited him. Join as rhythm guitarist. He agreed, unintentionally joining a partnership that would change pop. John later, Lennon recalled that moment vividly, calling it the day things truly changed. Started moving. Even the churchyard meeting would later become Beatles legend, home to the gravestone that inspired timeless tune Ella Laner. But Paul and John's friendship went beyond music. Both boys carried emotional wounds from lost young mothers. For Paul, the pain was severe. His mother, devoted nurse Mary, was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent mastectomy. Tragically, she died on October 31, 1956 at 47 from post-surgery problems. The loss destroyed Paul's world. His dad was overcome by grief, say even suicidal, before discovering strength to raise Paul and his brother Michael alone. For youth, that hurt never went away. Paul. It kept him, quietly shaping him and his speech. Music's sanctuary and manner of turning tragedy into beauty. At that time, John Lennon's mother, Julia, comforted him. Paul. She understood his loss. Few could. Then fate struck again. Just a year later, John lost his mother in a vehicle crash. A tragedy would strengthen the lads' bond deeply. From then on, they weren't just bandmates. Two young lads sharing loss turned sorrow into melody and melancholy into something eternal. Connection would become Beatles' emotional heartbeat and the inspiration behind some finest songs ever. How Paul McCartney excelled after failure. Now, few know this story. No. Everyone knows Paul McCartney. As the iconic founder and half-off-to Beatles songwriters. But when he joined the group in there initially as the Quarryman, he wasn't brought in to play bass. His role intended to lead the band guitarist. Paul was then actually more technical on the guitar more than anybody else, even Lennon. So, when Teen's band switched from skiffle origins in rock and roll, Paul was the obvious leader. He debuted live on October 18, 1957, in the new Club Moore Hall, Norris Green, Liverpool. That night should have started anything enormous. Instead, It became an early career moment. Laugh later about what could be Paul McCartney's Beatles debut. He froze. The 15-year-old musician, entirely blank throughout guitar solo on Arthur Smith's Guitar Boogie. His stage fear was severe that my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Paul subsequently recalled in Beatles anthology that his solo playing was easy time in rehearsal. Everything came apart, hit the spotlight. He admitted it, thought, "What am I doing here?" That slip ended up changing history. George Harrison soon appointed lead guitarist. As they say, destiny took over. Even the club promoter that night wasn't impressed. He scribbled good. The band's visiting card suffered, likely a nod to the anxious newcomer that would become one of the finest Globe musicians. Paul's offstage rivaled his love of music interest in his first serious girlfriend, Dorothy Rand, whom he met in Casbah Club, 1959. But as per that Beatles biographer Bob Spitz's relationship had a downside. Paul could govern and shape Dorothy into his ultimate ideal partner. He picked her clothes, makeup, even paid for her French actress Brigitte-style hair. John Lennon and Bardot seemed alike, but both devoted to. He disapproved smoking and hanging out with friends despite never following those rules himself. Meanwhile, the Quarrymen changed quickly. By 1960, changing names like Johnny the Moon Dogs, Silver Beatles, even Beatles settled down. On the music changing name forever, Beatles. Given that choice made, they packed and went to Hamburg, Germany, hoping to make their mark. Life in Hamburg was wild. Dorothy and Paul communicated through. He also dove headfirst into city nightlife. Later, admitting having many relationships, many escorted, when Hamburg women were masters of lovemaking. The band started utilizing Prelude, a stimulus that kept them awake, marathon sets lasting into early dawn. It was here that Paul started a complex drug relationship in excess. The Hamburg tale gets better. Crazier. One night, the Beatles were driven out of Germany after troubles. Paul and drummer Pete Best found themselves in darkness, packing their gear. A moment in youthful mischief, they decided set a condom to illuminate the burning and fastening it to the wall. It was a harmless joke, but club owner disagreed. Unhappy that the band secured a deal, he deals with a competitor that contacted the police and accused Paul arson. Ironically, the club's walls were an inflammable stone. Still, the prank got McCartney and Best involved German prison overnight. The next morning, cops added them toadporting them home. Liverpool with George Harrison had been expelled for being underage. That left Lennon and Hinter Stu Sutcliffe, but not for long. John returned 10 or so days later. Staying behind, Stu joined Hamburg School of Art and beginning a relationship with native woman. Sadly, he died 2 years later from a tragic brain hemorrhage affected the band. That crazy 1960 visiting Hamburg revealed both recklessness and fortitude that would explain the Beatles' prominence. Paul McCartney may have struggled abroad, setting flames, testing limits. However, Liverpool was home that significant challenges of his journey just started. While Paul McCartney returned to Liverpool after that Wilder ran non-stop in Hamburg, weary but confident. The Beatles' sound was refined, built stamina, and tasted the sort playing night gives freedom after night to boisterous crowds. As he returned home, life slammed him with anything unexpected. Girlfriend Rand said she was pregnant. McCartney is shocked. Suddenly, this dreamer youth faced fatherhood. He did most would have done. He suggested they chose a wedding date. And for briefly, it seemed like McCartney's life changed, turning family-based rather than fame. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. Rand got hurt. Pre-wedding miscarriage. The loss devastated, and shortly after McCartney engagement ended. Babyless, and he was free again, no marriage forthcoming. No obligations, emotional attachments. Freedom would soon fuel behind the Beatles' relentless rise. By in 1962, everything changed. Now Ringo Starr and George Harrison, an official lineup member, and band had written their first hit, Do Love Me. 1 year, that lone you is everywhere. By 1963, Lennon-McCartney partnership became strongest songwriting world's most famous duos. Songs like I Saw Her Standing and Can't Buy My Love became instant classics. And the band's sound soon spread the Atlantic, causing Beatlemania in America. You would think that level celebrity would be overpowering. The unending tours, yelling fans, steady pressure, everything sounds exhausting, but McCartney didn't see that way. His novel, The Eye of the He, called it the storm. Fulfillment of a dream. Once told seeing while people may have thought felt uncomfortable or confined, he saw it differently. Like for him, being part of something amazing picture he always wanted to star in it. Still, celebrity had drawbacks. Press labeled each bug. John was clever. Quiet George 1. A tag stuck on Paul. I hated the cute Beatle. It labels followed him for decades. Never liked it, he said. Even slightly. True, he understood being remembered as Beatle. That was acceptable to him. He even compared to cinematic legends who could like Greta. Never forget them or Bridget Bardot. But being the cute one, not him. He stated, maybe there were early flashes. But with time, the edges gained harder and the label didn't fit. Anymore. Talked about it years later. Later on Howard Stern, saying how annoying that the media limited them to basic nicknames. Once people deemed him cute, it was inevitable. Avoid calling me that, he said. I detest it. But once stayed put. Despite everything, labels and disappointments, Best the Wildest was ahead. The world hadn't seen anything like the Beatles would release next. When Paul lost everything and everyone by when the 1960s took off, the Beatles had grown beyond the mop-crown band that first hit the world storm. They changed creatively, personally, and musically. Paul McCartney was diving headfirst, first into avant-garde, pulling weird new studio concepts, testing anything that could advance their sound. He even tried abstract film initiatives, expressing his creativity ways beyond music. Many credit John Lennon for Tomorrow Never psychedelic magic, but that surreal soundscape was done by Paul. He pieced with tape loops, small sound fragments stacked to develop something original. It was clever and little insane. But with two creative giants like Paul and John steering the same ship, tension was inevitable. Cracks already appearing around the period of Rubber Soul. Their group was weary and burned out constant touring and fame. Paul subsequently admitted it felt like losing their souls. That fatigue was so severe that after 1966 US tour, the Beatles chose stop live performance. Still, Paul was a speedster. He'd earned his creative restlessness into Sgt. Pepper's Future Lonely Hearts. The idea was bold. He wanted Beatles to reinvent oneself, to discard their former image and act as a fresh person. He said he was tired of Beatles. Later. We became men, not boys. Wine tended to be artists. The result was masterwork, lauded innovative and genre-defining. But oddly, it started off-end. In 1967, catastrophe struck. Brian Epstein, their adored manager, stabilizing father, died unexpectedly. He died behind a huge void. Paul stepped in naturally. Not everyone was a leader. Happy with that. Lennon later said Paul seemed to lead the band. Frustration circled slowly weakened their cohesiveness. As things fell apart, Paul began searching for stability, anything real. When Linda Eastman appeared, Linda was more than a gorgeous face. She was a gifted photographer who carved, making her mark in rock scene. In her early career, rushed into a private Rolling Stones advertising event where she was the entry restricted to photographers. By 1968, first to do so, she made history. Woman to shoot Rolling Stone cover. She was tough, charming, and serious. Talent. In May 1967, Paul was most eligible bachelor worldwide. After attending a dinner gathering sponsored by Epstein to commemorate completion of Sgt. Pepper, went to one of his favorite hangouts, Bag & Ales nightclub in Soho, London. It was in the smoky haze, and he met Linda at Electric Music. She filming a project in Town Rock and Four-Letter Words, and attended the club with buddies from Animals. When Paul saw her, he had to make it across the room. Emotion. As she passed, he stood, playfully blocked her route. He introduced himself. Next came his spontaneous but elegant invitation. He requested she join him at another club afterward. Linda was curious. What Paul hooked her though. Claimed ownership of original René Surrealism paintings Magritte. She loved it, so she permitted their visit. That night, she returned home and stayed until morning. Paul was then still with Jane Asher. Nothing major may happen immediately, but his flame with Linda was undeniable. Following his relationship with Paul, kept thinking after Jane left. About Linda. He arrived in 1968. Out and invited her to London. From there, things moved quickly. Falling after finishing the White Album, Paul flew to NYCBE with Linda and her kid's daughter Heather. Away from chaos, Beatlemania brought him uncommon peace. He entered the city with a beard free, unnoticed by fans. It was a snapshot of his regular existence missing. Later that year, Paul knew Linda was it. While traveling to he suggested Portugal, and they were married at Marilione in March 1969 London Registry Office. It wasn't, not a flashy wedding. They, even though it was dreary and rainy, prevent hundreds of fans from gathering steps outside. Paul's brother Mike was supposedly best man, yet his train he arrived late after breaking down. The ceremony went on with Mike and the Beatles' helper Mal Evans signing as witnesses. Linda's daughter, Heather, was there. But here's twist. Wedding almost didn't happen. Paul admits they had a huge dispute the night before and nearly scrapped it. Their partnership wasn't ideal, but made it real. Paul later laughed at how others saw them perfect showbiz couple. In reality, they had ups and downs like everyone else. They didn't glide through trouble-free life. They were together in the middle. Their love endured. But it was hard to ignore one obvious detail about that wedding. No one else Beatles arrived. That wasn't accident. Paul admitted he didn't invite them, saying the band had broken beyond repair. They weren't as close anymore. Just when things couldn't crazy rumor. Chaos will increase made headlines later that year. Fans said Paul McCartney died in 1966, the vehicle crash, and replaced by lookalike. Dead Paul conspiracy spread like wildfire, with people browsing album covers and lyrics search for clues. Finally, Paul had correct the record. Posed Linda, Baby Mary, and Heather for Life's cover under the title, Paul is Still With Us. Family photo ended it. Rumors. Even as fans sighed, respite, the actual anguish remained. To come. The Beatles disintegrated. Years of creative stress had an impact. Then on April 10, Paul quit in 1970. The band. His Beatles loss sent him into profound depression. For someone living his entire adulthood has felt like part of that brotherhood ground had gone beneath him feet. Then Linda became his anchor. She advised him to start afresh, regain tranquility and purpose. Together, they sought refuge in Scotland at Campbelltown High Park Farm near the Mall of Kintyre. Paul owned land acquired at Jane Asher years prior suggestion, but rarely visited. Now it became his refuge. There was life. Just Paul, Linda, Heather, and an open countryside. For the first he breathed in years. He called it true freedom, an escape from fame and chaos. Along with Linda, love of nature and constancy reminding him he had much more to give. That peaceful life in Scotland started it, something new. Linda by his side, Paul McCartney discovered his creativity slowly ignite again, and his next chapter beginning of narrative. The tragedy had affected Paul forever. Paul McCartney wrote something remarkable. For Linda. Maybe I'm impressed. It was his way to demonstrate her strength guided him through the emotional storm off the Beatles splitting. After Paul released a successful solo album wasn't satisfied. He took a boldly started a new band called Wings. Now, Linda wasn't exactly recognized for singing, but Paul made sure she was alongside him. After leading the band, starting another the biggest band ever must have been scary. Though Paul had nothing to worry about. Small Wings started softly. They gained momentum and soon were huge. A 1971 band launched with Red Rose Speedway and Wildlife. But Band on the Run, 1973, truly changed everything. The record was smashed commercially and critically, gave the world 2 top 10 singles, Jet and Band Run. Around that time, they delivered the unforgettable James Bond title track Bond Flick Live and Let Die. While Paul kept topping the charts, Linda centered on her growing interest in animal rights. Her vegetarian campaign began. Food Company and wrote several bestseller vegetarian cookbooks, becoming a movement pioneer lengthy before mainstreaming. The 1970s a decade of success for Paul. Numerous prizes, chart-stop hits, and a new musical identity after Beatles. But just as fading Wings period, tragedy devastatingly hit possible. Lennon was shot. Hugh was lost forever. When reporters flooded Paul outside a studio, yearning for action, his reply stunned everyone. Muttered nearly. Absence. Drag, isn't it? World of frigid sound shocked him. Reaction without emotion. But Paul later revealed his great regrets. He said he had been in total disbelief, unable to comprehend had occurred. Through the years, he spoke often how John's death hurt his heart. Then another heartbreak. Diagnosed in 1995, Linda McCartney breast cancer was already present way too advanced. A while, chemotherapy offered hope. But March 1998 saw doctors discover cancer has spread to her liver. Paul later called those 2 years a living hell. He said Linda never whined and never gave up, even when the odds were against her. Finally, Paul said, it was not to be. In her final days, Paul carried a weighty secret. After physicians told him her liver was failing and having few days left, he opted no. He thought she wouldn't want to know. Don't know. The book Fab claims an intimate Paul McCartney life. Had desired her peace as long as possibly as feasible. Last ride together across Arizona's desert. The next day, she was too weak to leave bed. The next day, she was gone to as the end approached. Paul tried to comfort her with a lovely image. He said she was on her fave the Appaloosa horse rides through forest on a sunny spring day, surrounded clear blue sky, blue bells. It was his final gift to her, a peaceful moment to remember forever. After Linda died, Paul hid to grieve privately. He eventually confessed. Close friend, Chrissy Hind of Pretenders. She mentioned how Paul and Linda had never spent a single night apart during their marriage, except for the brief time he spent in jail after marijuana arrest. Paul's answer was simple and heartbreaking. He said he just loved being with her, and that was what made losing her so unbearable. In the year that followed, Paul admitted that he cried often, almost to the point of embarrassment, but he also said it was the only thing that felt right. Helleter revealed that the pain of losing Linda stirred up old memories. His own mother had died of breast cancer when Hugh was young, though he hadn't understood it at the time. He remembered his father holding in his emotions, never letting his children see him cry. Paul, in contrast, allowed himself to feel everything. One of Paul's most meaningful songs, Let It Be, came from a dream that connected both these losses. Many people assumed Mother Mary referred to the Virgin Mary, but it was actually inspired by his late mother, Mary McCartney. During a difficult period in his life, he dreamt she came to him, gently reassuring him that everything would be all right and simply telling him to let it be. When he woke up, the words and melody flowed out of him effortlessly, becoming one of the most timeless songs ever written. Paul McCartney utterly despised him. In the past the late 70s and early 80s, an unlikely partnership began to form between Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson. The whole thing kicked off in a way that was almost cinematic. One day, out of nowhere, Michael Jackson picked up the phone and called Paul directly. McCartney later recalled thinking it was just an overly eager fan. He even got annoyed, wondering how someone had managed to get his private number. It wasn't a fan at all. It was Michael Jackson himself. And his message was simple. He wanted to make hits. And that's exactly what they did. Together, they created a trio of major songs. Say the Girl Is Mine and The Man. The collaboration wasn't just about the music, though. Around that time, Jackson's Thriller had taken over the world, and he and McCartney had become genuine friends. For a while, it seemed like one of the most powerful creative pairings in pop music. After Thriller's massive success, Jackson reportedly went to McCartney for advice on how to handle his new wealth. Paul, who had already been in the business for decades, told him to invest in music publishing to buy the rights to songs, because that's where the real money was. It turned out to be advice that would come back to haunt him. Not long after, Michael Jackson took that tip to heart in a big way. In 1985, when the ATV music catalog went up for sale, including the publishing rights to more than 200 Beatles songs, Jackson made a move that would shock the entire music world. He bought it all for $47.5 million. Just like that, Michael Jackson owned the rights to most of the Beatles' classic hits, effectively beating McCartney to his own music. For Paul, it was a crushing blow. He had long hoped to reclaim ownership of those songs one day. And to see a friend make that move instead felt deeply personal. McCartney later said it felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. When he confronted Jackson about it, the king of pop reportedly told him it was nothing personal, just business. After that, the two drifted apart. There was no dramatic fallout, just a quiet end to what had once been a great friendship. Years later, when Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, rumors started spreading that he had left the Beatles' catalog to McCartney in his will. Fans loved the idea of such artistic gesture, a final act of reconciliation between two legends. But the rumor wasn't true. McCartney himself emphasized that Jackson hadn't abandoned him any rights at all. He even ignored the reports that he'd been devastated by it, admitting he never trusted the narrative in the first place. Still, McCartney ultimately got his happy ending. Through his own deals, he was able to regain control of his music catalog years later. And despite everything that transpired, he spoke favorably of Michael Jackson after his passing, claiming he felt lucky to have worked with him. It was a tumultuous friendship that began with creativity, ended in business, and leaving behind one of the most fascinating chapters in music.